This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm Jamie Bogner. This is episode 248, and we've got a hybrid live and remote podcast going on today. We're here recording in the Craft Beer and Brewing office in my nice little podcast studio that I built that very rarely gets used for in-person live podcasts, but is the place where I typically do remote podcasts. We're here with Bob Slack and Justin Teff from Pulpit Brewing, who are out here in Colorado. Bob is here in Colorado for the WeldWorks Invitational that's coming up this weekend. And Justin is back in Iowa. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Happy to be here.
Thank you.
And we've got you patched in, and it's an interesting one. I've never really done it this way, where we've got somebody remote and somebody live,
Teff had to work, and, I wanted to go on vacay, so.
Hey, that's how it goes. As a little bit of backstory, when I was out at our Minnesota Craft Beer Festival in April, I ducked down then to Chicago the week after that, filmed some classes for All Access video program. On the way, took a little detour down through Rochester, Minnesota, and met up with Austin from Forager for a podcast. And then I was like, I would love to go stop down. While I'm down this close, let me go down to Decorah and see, if I can take a look at these breweries. And of course, that was where we got to meet. And it was a kind of a quick one. We didn't have time for a podcast that day. But I did get to see the brewery. We did get to talk about things, and we did get to make a connection.
Shared a beer. It was a great time.
We did. And so now we're here. We had made the plans to do this so that Justin could also be a part of this. Thank you all for joining me for it. We're going to talk about everything from stout brewing to IPA brewing and, maybe a few other things along the way. Of course, stouts, specifically that dessert stout approach that you all take is it's probably what the bigger, broader world outside of your home markets really know you for.
Yeah, it's what we've become known for.
It is what you become known for. However, you certainly make a full lineup of different kinds of beers.
You have to.
You do.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about all those things, but first, for nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. G&D stands above the rest as the only chiller manufacturer that engineers your glycol piping for free. G&D also stands alone as the only chiller manufacturer with an in-house team of installers and engineers with 30 years of real-world field labor experience in breweries, wineries, and distilleries. Contact the Total Glycol System Design experts today at gdchillers.com. Also, what if you could take your favorite recipes and make a non-alcoholic version without sacrificing the flavor, color, or beer quality? NA, no problem. The Alchemator from ProBrew uses proprietary membrane technology to strip the alcohol from the beer without sacrificing all the elements like flavor and color that make your beer great. Are you ready to brew like a pro? Check out www.probrew.com to learn more about the Alchemator from ProBrew, or shoot them an email at contactus@probrew.com today. ProBrew is a subsidiary of Technoblend, now a ProMock brand. So let's start off with you, Justin, since you are out there on the phone. Talk to me about your entree into beer. What was that connective moment? And then how did you decide then to turn beer into something that you were going to build a career from?
I think it was back in my college days, kind of started dabbling in drinking craft beer, drank a lot of natural ice too. And then it wasn't really until I moved to San Diego for a brief time that I really fell in love with craft beer and could kind of see like the breadth of what was out there, drinking Pliny the Younger, or not Pliny, the Elder, a bunch of stuff from Green Flash and things like that. I kind of fell in love with the craft brewing scene and the beers that were available. And then my roommate and I at the time started dabbling with just stovetop batches, just extract brews. And, that was fun to drink some craft beers, make some craft beers, and, kind of spiraled from there.
Sure. Then how'd you get from Southern California to Iowa?
I'm actually originally from, I grew up about 20 miles east of Decorah. So I ended up moving back to Iowa. Just decided that I loved making beer, doing that in my parents' basement multiple times a week. And ended up applying for a job at another brewery in Decorah here. Got a job there, and then eventually got approached to start Pulpit, and here we are now.
Very cool. Bob, what's your story look like?
Before we do that, Teff, you have to tell them the story of your ancestor in Dorchester.
Yes, there's obviously back in the 1800s, like many more breweries. But apparently in the hometown that I grew up in, had an ancestor that worked at a brewery, and they ended up dying by falling in a kettle. So,
oh my God,
I feel like my fate is kind of,
it's an ongoing joke in the
determined.
brewery. He's got to get in there one day.
Does the ghost help you or haunt you?
I try not to think about it too much.
Fair enough. Well, past is hopefully not prologue in this sense.
Yeah.
Bob, what's your story look like?
The classic one where a kid goes to Europe, tries something that isn't Busch Light for the first time, gets blown away, came back, still kind of drank macro stuff through college, got introduced, oddly enough, to Belgian beers. And it was actually my first love, corked 750s of Duvel Unibrew. Captured my heart, and I couldn't believe beer could be that. So I drank that for a very long time. Started dabbling in other stuff. Could not stand IPAs the first time I tried them. Now I have them every day.
You're drinking one now.
I know. It's great. And then, started homebrewing at 19, and one thing led to another. Got a job kind of as like a summer gig at a now sadly defunct brewery in Iowa. Worked there for a couple years, and then also got hired by this other brewery in our town. And then, along with Justin, was poached to start what we have now.
Poached. Okay. Yeah. And this other brewery will remain nameless, but I'm sure people can do their own research on that one and figure that one out.
They'll figure it out.
At what point did you decide, like, hey, this is what I want to devote my life to, and I want to make beer for a living? Or have you yet to decide that yet? I mean,
I don't know what I'm going to be when I grow up. I don't know. There was actually, oddly enough, one point when I was ruining my mom's kitchen that she's like, I think you would be good at this. I'm like, really? You mean it? And yeah, I don't know. It's the passion for the whole process. And now it's the community and all the great people that we've got to meet over the years. I don't know. I love it, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. So.
Yeah, I feel like I'm kind of in the same boat where, it was a hobby turned, like, didn't really anticipate going into the professional world of it, but it just kind of happened, and wouldn't trade it for anything. Yeah, the scene, the people, it's an amazing industry to be in.
For sure. And you all have been able to make a mark, certainly bigger than, I guess that's an interesting thing about that town of Decorah, a very small town, very small population, but certainly breweries in a plural sense that have reached out beyond the expected geographic bounds of a town that size and made a mark, in a bigger beer world around the country.
I think that's partially because of our incessant need to do collaborations. Like, we love reaching out to other people and traveling to other breweries, or other breweries come here. It's truly one of my favorite parts of the job. It's going back to meeting new people and learning new techniques. And I don't know, people have been very kind to us over the years, and I don't know why, but we'll take it.
Sure. Well, there's a 2018 Breakout Brewer story in Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine about y'all, and a recipe for Little Buddy Pale Ale if people want to try their hand at brewing a Pulpit Rock beer themselves.
Forgot about that beer.
Go dive into our archives and search for that because it's all out there. Let's pivot and talk a little bit about stout brewing. Certainly that's what people know you all most for. I shouldn't say this. Those are the beers they tend to get out further, get traded out to further things that tend to get attention from the hype market in the beer world. It's certainly not the core of what you do. You all are a brew pub, or a taproom focused brewery that spends a lot of time making great beer for your local market and then also does packaging that gets out there too. Certainly the barrel aged beer is not the focus of what you do. They are a part of what you brew. Let's talk about that. First, is your brewery struggling to source or afford berry ingredients? Historic heat waves devastated U.S. berry crops, causing supply to dwindle and prices to skyrocket. That's why brewers are switching over to Old Orchard's craft concentrate blends, which mimic straight concentrates, but at a better price point and with a more reliable supply. Is it any surprise that Old Orchard's best sellers are raspberry and blackberry flavors? Reclaim your margins and order your craft concentrates at oldorchard.com/brewer. Also working on a new sour beer, Fermentis, the obvious choice for beverage fermentation, is now offering an expanded range of dry bacteria for the production of sour beers. To learn more about how Fermentis can improve the quality of your fermentation and for the latest on their exciting new product releases, visit fermentis.com. So now you can set me straight if I said anything incorrectly right there before the break. Otherwise, we can dive into talking about stouts.
Yeah, no, you hit it. We're primarily taproom focused. We do can a lot of beer for off-site consumption, off sale, and we like to do the release format. We do a little bit of distro, but it's very limited. And we kind of would like to keep it that way. At one point early on, we vowed to never sell beer outside of Decorah. It's changed since then a little bit, but
sure.
But it's still pretty true to that original vision.
And so you mentioned earlier you're poached. What does poached mean? I guess there are other investor owners in the brewery.
They were looking to start a brewery in Decorah where there already was one. Small town. We thought they were crazy, and with a lot of anxiety, we accepted. We haven't looked back. Early years were a little rough, but I think we kind of came into our own, especially with like what we're known for now, because beers like that weren't really being made in Iowa at that time. I don't know. It's kind of, like I said, what we love to make. Sure.
So this other brewery that you worked for certainly built a name for their brewery with coveted, particularly barrel-aged stouts. As you all then moved into Pulpit Rock and started brewing, did that become an expectation that you then had to live up to? How did you then decide, hey, we're going to go do this too?
I mean, I think everybody, everybody loves BA stouts. We do too. It's one of those things where we actually didn't release our first BA beer till 2 years in. And then it was a very fledgling program. Like we only had 8 barrels. Now we have, 36, which is still not much.
It's still not very much.
No. We're
36. Yeah. Boy, you guys are just blowing up the market.
We're not.
That's why they're rare.
Yeah, we're not like Central Waters or Bottle Logic or any huge brewery like that. We're trying to get 48, so that's a big number for us.
Okay, dare to dream.
Barrel aged stouts haven't always been our focus. The thing that I think we've really tried to strive for as of late is a consistent release of a non-barrel aged pastry stout, and then maybe anywhere between 2 to 4 BA releases a year. Like I said, we don't have a lot of BA beer to blend with, and it's one of those things where it's much easier for us to release a non-barrel aged beer because we can crank that out faster, and then let the BA beer sit until it's ready. Sorry.
I was just going to say, like, it used to be when we had just 8 bourbon barrels, it used to be like, one in, one out sort of deal. Like we would release those 8 bourbon barrels that year, like a year after they were sitting in the barrels, and now we have a little bit more of a stockpile, not much, but we can, sit on them until they're truly ready.
We're trying to get better at blending.
Yeah.
Yep.
And let more beer sit there so that you have broader blending stock.
Yeah, so that's, I guess I don't know if this is the right point to talk about it, but due to the viscous nature of our stouts, we found that like they need longer to sit in barrel. So we're looking at now, it's quite common now that the beer has to be like 2 years old or 3 years old. I actually brought you those gift bottles, a blend of 3-year-old Imperial Stout and 2-year-old, over 2-year-old barley wine. Early on we would release it, like as Justin said, on a schedule of like 12 months. Like, well, this beer's ready, so it's got to come out of the barrel.
Sure.
And now we draw the hype of these non-BA cans to basically fuel the time that we need to wait for the real good stuff. And then we also like to try to do a tandem release of a non-BA can with a BA on the same day. So
is the challenges of any business trying to
cash flow, baby,
make sure the cash flow is in the right place, that make sure that you're not also just frustrating consumers around this, but also making the products that you want to make to reflect what your vision is for the brewery itself.
We had a release years ago that I overheard somebody kind of like, I didn't get any barrel character, and it was like lit a fire, and I'm like, I'll show you.
So as you all dove into making barrel-aged beers, how did you start thinking about how you would differentiate what you made from others? And obviously, there's that dinosaur in the room, that we won't address. But in that sense, you also worked within a community of brewers, and you've got fantastic peers locally, like you mentioned, Austin from Forager.
Great man.
You're right there, with relatively close to Chicago, where you've got the strong barrel-aged beer tradition, from Bourbon County onwards. You've got Central Waters. You've got a whole bunch of others that are making fantastic stuff up there. Talk to me about how you all set out to differentiate yourselves and make something that was going to, just reflect the quality that you wanted from Pulpit Rock.
I don't know if we set out to do that, but
stumbled into.
Yeah, we literally did. I guess I would say we could put it short. Viscosity.
Yeah.
That's, I guess, what it's it's gotten out of hand lately, but that's one of the things that people seem to gravitate towards these days. And like I said before, that also necessitates the longer maturation of the beer. That and I guess we could talk about the adjuncts later, but it's just our approach to the adjuncts. And we actually only released our first straight up barrel-aged stout. Teff, when was that? Was that last December? December before that, wasn't it?
I think it was 2020.
Yeah, it was 2020.
I don't know. It all kind of runs together.
Yeah. It's all the same year.
So then talk to me about building this recipe with an idea of viscosity in mind, trying to kind of capture that richness and mouthfeel. And, as we talk about this in the world of Imperial Stout, this same effect, we see it across other beverage categories as well. You've got winemakers that are also pushing that kind of inky viscosity in wine. You've got other beverage makers. I mean, even think about the kind of viscosity in coffee drinks now. It's something that we all seem to expect from a palate and a texture kind of standpoint. Beer is not alone in this, but it was certainly a jump, a number of years ago as we moved from, say, that thinner approach to barrel-aged stout that Bourbon County defined into this kind of richer, blacker, thicker, sweeter, more viscous stout approach. How'd you all start going about building that?
We've gone through a couple different iterations of stout recipes. We started out with one for probably the first, 2.5 years. But it really wasn't like a vehicle for the barrels, I guess. It ended up, we were using a lot of roasted barley in it, and it kind of came off as like ashy and acrid. So kind of had to almost cover that up with adjuncts to make it palatable.
Wow.
We've since changed our recipe I think it was probably late 2019, early 2020,
yep.
somewhere around there. We've eliminated the roasted barley in the recipe, use a lot more crystal malt, dark crystal malt, to kind of make the base beer more palatable and more fudgy, more of a vehicle for the adjuncts, for the barrels, kind of just let the barrels do their thing. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of been one of those things where, you know, we didn't exactly know what we were doing right out of the gate, but we kind of figured it out along the way.
Yeah. To Teff's point, people will stop and ask us, we're like, what are you using for cacao or chocolate in this beer? It's like, it's just the base beer. Yeah, so we're huge fans. We're not going to give you the full grist, but huge fans of Simpson's chocolate, and then Cara Aroma, Cara Bohemian, to name a few. Yeah, and then the whole process of doing it it's laborious. Typically the wort boils overnight. You know, like we concentrate it overnight. So like I'll come in at, I don't know, right around somewhere between 2 and 4 p.m. Do 2 mashes. Essentially, mostly first runnings, fill up the kettle.
What is pre-boil gravity goal?
We don't even check it anymore.
No, it's just as much as you can get out of there.
Yeah, it's usually like 90 or something like that in specific gravity, or right around there. And then, you know, pour a bunch of firm cap in it.
Stop running off at what point? Do you say it's mostly first runnings?
Yeah, we just put a small amount of sparge water on the top, and it's like what we can get in the kettle.
Okay.
Typically, yeah, we're right around 10 barrels to set it for overnight, and then firm cap boils, until we come in the next day. Might be 12 hours. At that point, we're maybe lost about half the kettle volume, and then make a final, the same, like a third mash. And then transfer that wort in, and then by that point, usually we end up somewhere in specific gravity, somewhere around 160 to 170. Boil normally for an hour after that, even though it's boiled for so many hours. Only hop extract for bittering in the kettle, about 45 IBUs. And then knock it out, and we ferment with USO5.
Yeah.
Dry, and it works beautifully to achieve not what you're really going for most beers, but 50% attenuation. And
sure.
Yeah, 50% is good these days.
Yeah. And we like a terminal gravity of anywhere between specific gravity of 60 and 80 for barrel, or for now. It's funny, like it used to be 40. And then we went up to 60 and we're like, wow, this is nice and plush. And then we went up to 80 and we're like, this is probably too much. And then people started clamoring for it more. And we're like, okay, where's the ceiling now? You know what I mean? But we still, I think I would keep it, somewhere between 60 and 80. That's a really nice level of plushness. And then it's a nice canvas to paint on with adjuncts if you want to, or throw it into a barrel and wait forever.
Are you using any techniques to produce gravity builders that won't necessarily just be perceived as sweetness?
Ooh, I haven't really thought of it that way. It's what the wort ends up being, and I don't know. There seems to be a balance there to it, but I think we just kind of by luck stumbled upon it. I don't know, Teff, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, we don't necessarily go out of our way to have all of this residual sugar in the base beer. We just kind of work with what this base has become. I mean, we can kind of touch on adding certain adjuncts that will, kind of also boost that viscosity and mouthfeel, and other ones that kind of detract from that.
Well, let's talk about building layers. You mentioned using dark specialty malts. but maybe, building some additional layers of flavor through that without spilling the entire grist bill, which I know, you want to keep somewhat secret there. Talk to me about some of those, kind of crystal caramel mid layers and, how you think about building that supporting, element for the deeper chocolate notes.
So we use, we can tell you all the malts. We just want to tell you the percentage. I mean, whatever.
Fair enough.
Raw 2-row, like classic flaked oats.
Sure.
Simpson's Crystal Extra Dark, Vireman, Cara Bohemian, and Cara Aroma, and then a higher percentage of chocolate malt. And I guess to answer your point, Justin and I really looked at the layering of those Cara malts, I guess, is like the supporting fact with more chocolate malt than we did before, and removing the roasted barley, which we thought we were kind of getting like that. We describe it as ashy. I don't know, just like a harsher character. This is more round, if you will, polished.
But rather than using more of the debittered malt, you just got rid of it.
Oh crap! Well, yeah, we also have C3 in there.
Okay,
we do use Carafa 3 as well. Yep.
It's still predominantly chocolate, though.
How do you then, of course you're building sweet beers, some of that roast character, some of that, little coffee element character that comes from darker malt, it can be useful and necessary to balance out some of the intense and abject sweetness that is also clearly a part of these beers. How do you all think about building that kind of balance, obviously without roast malt in it?
I think it's, kind of alluded to this earlier, but there's certain adjuncts like when we do vanilla, for instance, without adding sweetness, it adds like that kind of faux sweetness and richness to the beer, versus like adding peanuts, for instance, kind of adds that peanut flavor but dries the beer out.
Right.
So it's kind of this balancing act of, you don't want to add too many adjuncts that are going to dry it out artificially, and too many that are just going to make it just, unbelievably sweet and unpalatable. So I think there's that, we basically use the same base recipe with varying starting and finishing gravities, and kind of go from there. And this is balancing act with the adjunct.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah,
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. Like we have the same base, and then I guess it comes down to the adjunct versus like manipulating the base. For the adjunct, we alter our adjuncts to fit around whatever that base is. That particular batch. To speak on what Justin said, yeah, like nuts, I think can help basically bolster the flavor of the beer. That's why I guess we've become known for a lot of nut beers. I guess in my opinion, the best pastry versions actually don't have that many pastries in it, and it's actually just the sheer amount of nuts that we put into it. We're very fortunate to have a good friend in Decorah, who is the head of Luther, basically the kitchen there. And he's an old friend of ours, actually Teff's former roommate. His name's Ryan Peterson. He's a great man.
Luther is the college that's in Decorah.
Yep. Small private university. It's because we basically buy so many pounds of raw nuts, and then Ryan is actually able to process all of them for us. So buying them raw, having them freshly roasted or toasted for us, that I think gives us the edge in our pastry game. I mean, other people don't have that ability, and I think that's really one of the only reasons why we stand out.
Well, I would love to. We'll come back and talk about that process around nuts, because that's really interesting that you're insisting on fresh roasting your own nuts in order to accomplish that, and figuring out how to get extraction out of nuts while also balancing fat content and other negative impacts have on the beer. Those are all things that I would love to talk about, but I do want to, I do want to keep talking about this, base for a minute, especially as you were mentioning earlier about how building this viscous stout. Well, let's first talk about fermentation, because you're using USO5, or Chico. You're getting this into a nice, clean fermentation with low esters. Are you using any enzymes to, help promote fermentation at this, higher ABV? What's that goal ABV that you hope to be, push this into barrels at? When do you consider fermentation finished? And are there any other concerns during that fermentation process with a beer this big that you guys employ in order to get successful fermentations before you then load it into a barrel?
I mean, we don't stress the base beer too much. We try and get that, seems like the magic number is 50% attenuation to kind of get it into that 1060 to 1080 range. We don't really go out of our way to add any additional enzymes, or make the wort extra fermentable or anything like that. We do end up having to basically pitch more yeast during fermentation to hopefully have it finish out at that. And we've honestly kind of struggled with that as of late.
Yeah, it's one of those things we've actually been blessed. It's almost not crockpot brewing, but set it and forget it. The fermented USO5 almost would immediately attenuate to 50% and just hang out there. From there, cold crash it for a long time with biofine and get her nice and clear. And then from there, it's ready to use. Yeah, we don't – this sounds funny, but we just don't really go – we just stumbled onto this method that works for us, and we don't usually have to go out of our way to correct anything.
But then you did mention earlier that you do have a small range of different gravities that then, that go into this.
It just depends on the batch. Like I said, we don't set, unless we specifically want it, very rarely anymore are we trying to target one particular gravity, because we're also making this at least once a month, and we'll actually have it held fully biofine, chilled, uncarbed, sitting in half barrels that we could either then later throw into a barrel or blend them together for a non-BA stout. So just kind of having a myriad of different gravities laying around, different paints to paint with. It's just one of those things that we've kind of blending, with barrels, but with gravity. We're not pros at it yet, but we at least,
one of these days you'll get the hang of it.
We'll figure it out one day. It's important to us to always have a stockpile of this stout and be constantly producing it. So I would say we at least brew it once a month, sometimes more.
Talk to me about that barrel aging process. Then you mentioned that as it got more viscous, that you noticed that the beers really needed more time in the barrel to pull character out of the barrels themselves.
Yeah, so we initially, the beers were far lower gravity. They were maybe going in the barrel at 145. Or sorry, at 45. Geez, that would be really thick. We noticed that as the viscosity went up, just that we weren't able to. It just wouldn't oxidize, basically. And then the other thing we stopped doing was we used to constantly top off the barrels, and we stopped doing that. So sometimes, actually, one of the latest releases, we were getting 40 gallons out of a 53-gallon barrel that was full. So it's that evaporation over time also adds to the density in the end.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like we said before, we don't have a lot of barrels to blend with. We're trying to add that over time, and then also with a range of densities. We haven't really manipulated the recipe that much. I guess we're actually bad at doing that. We should, anytime we do a collab, we should actually manipulate the grist, but we just kind of stick with what we know.
To Bob's point too, we have kind of started manipulating the barrels that we're putting it in. So it used to be a lot of 10 to 12 year Heaven Hill barrels, like almost exclusively, and we've started branching out a little bit more into some younger barrels, different distilleries and stuff like that. So we're hoping that we have more blending stock and maybe stuff that ages out a little bit faster, that we can pick up that barrel character maybe in not 2 to 3 years, but 18 months or something like that.
It seems to be 18 months to 3 years right now. It's kind of like the sweet spot. We actually have a couple barrels left that are 3 years old now, and we're hoping to maybe make some with them later this year.
And at different age, and intensity will contribute to that kind of depth of blending stock that you're looking for.
Yeah. Like I said, we're still very new to it, but we're very happy with some of the things we're able to do lately. We have a collab we did with Horace, and it's half barley wine, half stout. So the stout was 3 years old, and it was actually the original grist that we were talking about before that had a lot more roasted barley to it. And even though I don't remember what the terminal density was of it, but it was still very plush, but it comes off as very dry. To blend it with, and that one's almost kind of getting a little bit more oxidized soy saucy, to blend it with something that was a little bit younger and very, very plush. The end result, I think, was actually pretty fun. And that was, I guess, the first experience that we've had being able to blend with the stockpile that we've had. So give us a few years. I think we'll have I think we'll have some more fun stuff coming out in the future.
No, I had a similar conversation with Marty from Revolution. We were doing a podcast with them a few years ago, and he was mentioning they had some brewing experiment or they had some batch where like it finished at 24 Plato, and he just said, "Fuck it, let me throw it in there and in the barrels and see what happens." And it was like, turned out that it aged a lot slower, but seems to survive in a much more hardy way through that barrel aging process, even though it took more time, and that it's never anything they would release by itself because it's just so sickly sweet, but that it added this other nice character that they could blend into other beers, and that in a way just didn't pick up that same kind of barrel character. It's fascinating to see that we are moving out of this era, we're fully out of this era of single stream beers for the most part, and fully embracing that idea of the blend in order to build these beers,
build character,
in the way that you want to achieve the goals and flavor that you're looking for.
I would say, also in terms of that, like the density, we still, I don't think a lot of our barrels are very liquor forward in the end because of that plushness in the end. I think it kind of helps cushion that, if you will. We've all had stouts that, are great, but they're like hot with liquor. I don't think we really have any of that in our inventory.
So we've talked a little bit about barrel aging, the base beer barrel aging process, the kind of beer that you're putting into the barrels. I want to talk about what happens then when you bring it back out and start thinking about how to use some of this stock, how to then, blend potentially from different barrels or different ages or whatnot of that stock. And then how you start envisioning, maybe as a chef does, building ingredients into, this kind of base to build a finished beer out of it. I want to talk more about that. But first, some exciting news about 3 new roasted malts from Best Malts. Chocolate Black and Black Malt Extra, these German malts, are roasted in a gentle, fluidized bed process to create smooth, debittered flavors when compared to traditional drum roasted malts. They are perfect in Schwarzbiers, Bocks, Alts, brown ales, porters, and stouts. Best Malts products are available exclusively through Country Malt Group. Contact CMG to try a free sample today. Also, as craft beer's most trusted point-of-sale system arrived as the mobile all-in-one solution you need to decrease service friction and increase guest satisfaction. With a full suite of craft-specific features, no contracts, and no monthly fees, Arrived provides the necessary tools to help your brewery grow. Go to arrived.com/CBB to set up a free customized demo. That's Arrived, ARRYVED.com/CBB. Remember, there is no I in Arrived. So let's talk about this next phase of your stout program, where you all have an idea that you want to create a a new beer and it's time to go pull something out of barrels and make something, what does that next piece of the process look like? Where do you, do you start with an idea of adjunct ingredients that you want to pull into this, pull barrel stock to kind of match and complement that? Do you taste barrel stock and then, use that as an inspiration to think about what kinds of ingredients will be, useful with that? Maybe it goes both ways depending on what the circumstance is. Talk to me about that creative process then that you all engage in and what it looks like next.
I would say that we typically do the former, where we have an idea of what we want to accomplish in terms of the finished profile, and then with the adjunct in mind, and then pull barrels that suit that. It's always a blessing and a curse to start your morning out sampling 8 barrels, but no, like we obviously
only 8.
Well,
amateur.
At a certain point, it's just like, man, you can't taste anymore. We'll sit down and have like a target release date in mind, and then go through all of the inventory that we have, the most mature stuff, and pull samples and say like, these are our leading candidates, and then order the adjuncts, get them in stock, and then when it comes time to pull, like we'll retaste like the contenders. There have been times in the past where we thought that one barrel was going to be the one, but it actually ended up being its contender, and pull that one instead. And then in terms of
what would change something like that? What in that kind of amount of time between your samples? How would you describe a difference in those?
I don't know. It could be the order which you sampled them. Say
context definitely matters.
Yeah. Like the first one of the day, you're like, wow, that's good. And then like the 8th one's like blah, when you're tasting very similar things. No, I mean, I can't really speak to that in depth, but it's just we go basically on sensory above all else. And then, it's kind of one of those things that we pick a adjunct profile that we're going to go for. Let's say, coconut almond. And
how was the creative process behind this? Like, how do you come up with like, hey, these are the things I want to blend now? Are you looking to, what other folks are doing out there? Are you inspired by nostalgic ideas of desserts you've had in the past? Is there, just a moment, or does somebody say, hey, there's this new thing, you should try this?
Truth be told, at this point now, it's kind of like, what haven't we done? But I mean, sometimes I guess, the inspiration, I suppose, is more of like in our pastry sour series,
right.
But we'll talk on that later. In terms of the stouts, it's one of those things where it's kind of like hard to get away from making a coconut stout, because that's what coconut's king in the stout game. So typically we have to make something like that, or throw in another nut. But I would say that regardless of what we choose, when we get it in. Shout out to nuts.com. Jeez.
Sure.
Lovely products. We order everything in raw, and then the man I mentioned earlier, Ryan, from Luther College here in Decorah, will take them and roast them all for us.
And what's the difference then between buying already roasted nuts and then buying them fresh and then having them roasted?
It's a sensory thing. I think you can immediately notice the difference between the pre-toasted and then something that's freshly toasted. And it's one of those things where he has access to all the convection ovens, and the coconut specifically. I think he back in our small batch days when we were starting to develop all these beers, I would roast them at home in a electric oven, and would kind of be afraid to like over toast it, but then we ended up not extracting like as much flavor from it as possible. And so he delivers the very well, like not borderline burnt, but like very well toasted coconut, and we've seen to extract more that way than under. So
just by heavy toasting it.
Yeah, but then the fact that he also has these like commercial convection ovens, that's like I think really the key there.
What do you think drives then that kind of intensity of? I mean, obviously, yes, you're dropping down the flavor of the coconut from the higher notes that tends to come in untoasted coconuts into more of that kind of richer mid-tone of coconut. But you're also in some sense maybe burning off a little bit of oil in the process too. Is this too scientific? Okay.
No, it's like it was one of those. Like, it's just it's one of those. Yeah, we don't. It's like I said. It's just that's what we've noticed works best.
Yeah.
To your point, yes. I mean, it makes sense that you might be flashing off something.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It's the proper medium rare, medium well toast. Is what works best. Well,
and that's for coconut. How about other nuts? Are you pushing like with something like a hazelnut also kind of going deep into the roast on that?
Actually, no. It's the not necessarily the opposite, but we feel you can get like a bit of acridness from like an over toasted nut.
Right.
So we try to go a little bit lighter on that. But the other key with it is that after they are roasted and cooled, almost kind of like a carryover cooking thing, like pull them before they're done and let them carryover cook out of the oven. After they are cooled well enough, they're pulsed up, so we get like the max amount of surface area, and that's very important. So like the first time that we tried doing a hazelnut stout, they were roasted appropriately, but we're left whole, and we got nowhere near the amount of extraction from that. So then the other thing to tie all these things together is that you have whatever blend of nuts or pastries that you want. And this is not going to be applicable to many other breweries, but we will choose the diameter of the tank that suits the volume of stout that we have. So it's like almost a perfect level of the bags of nuts to the volume of the beer. So we we'll sometimes tie up a 20-barrel bright tank for 4 barrels of beer and about 400 pounds of nuts, just because
volumetrically that's what the amount of nuts. That's what will
max saturation at that point, and then we'll tie it up for maybe about a week, and then we'll do the same thing again. So it's the combination of that, like the freshly roasted nut, picking the right size volume tank for the volume of the beer. With the displacement, all this adjuncts, and then doing multiple rounds. So that's the other thing. It's like we will do almost mirroring batches of adjuncts. So let's say it's 150 pounds of coconut and 50 pounds of almond. Like that's just the first round. Then you have a second round of the same thing. But at that point we have to go into like a smaller tank, because there's the absorption of the adjuncts in the other tank. So
let me back up on this for just a second. First, when you say you pulse, what does that mean? I mean, how small are you looking for? You're just not looking for powder. You're looking for
just like a ground up nut.
Okay.
At least to get it cracked. So if you put it into like a robo coupe, or if we have micro amounts of stuff at the brewery, we have a Vitamix. Like 1 or 2 pulses is enough to.
Just enough to kind of give it a rough crush.
Yeah. You're able to extract much more at that point. And then
from there you go into bags.
Yeah. So
you don't use a recirculation tank or anything.
So it's one of those things where we landed on this method. And like I said, it might not be applicable to other breweries to tie up a bright tank that long.
Sure.
But we actually have more bright tanks than fermenters in our brewery because we do so many of these infusions, and some of them require multiple infusions. So we need all of that tank space to do this, or some different tanks. We just like the variety of sizes in tanks, so that we also sometimes use these bright tanks as unit tanks. Like we'll ferment in them if we have to, obviously package out of, and then when we talk about the pastry beers, we infuse our fruit and all that stuff in there. Getting back to the stouts, we will buy just crap tons of the 12 by 19 fine mesh straining bags from BSG. You can boil them, sand them, and then load them up with these nuts, almost like they're sandbags. And so we throw all these sandbags, arrange them into the bottom of these flat bottom bright tanks, and then transfer the beer onto that. Hold it cold for, depending on what we're trying to do, typically about a week, and then maybe another week.
Cold.
Yeah, cold. So like we do everything
How cold?
About 36 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh, yeah, very cold.
Yeah, so
Why cold rather than warmer extraction?
we just felt that that's the best character. Actually, we've tried to do warmer extraction, like room temp beer and nuts, and I would say that you're going to get a much faster extraction, but you might not pull the same character. I don't know. It's, I guess, a more gentle approach. And we're able to dedicate that amount of time to it. And I truly think that that's what makes the product what it is. So it's the, cold extraction over a long period of time, and then multiple doses, typically two, sometimes. I don't know why peanuts always like give us trouble. Sometimes it's 3. We've had to do 4 infusions before in the past, and just, cursing the whole time.
That's crazy expensive too.
Oh yeah. I mean, the beers are very expensive. But it's one of those things where if you want it to be that way and all real and no extract, like that's the only way we've been able to accomplish that. So yeah, multiple extractions, and then
and you just take a taste-driven approach to this, where you do the extraction.
Oh yeah, So for example, like a coconut beer, we kind of have down like now to our ratio, but then like we're getting better at peanut. But for like a period of time, we were throwing in like, I don't know, like over 100 pounds per barrel of like peanuts, and it was just ridiculous.
100 pounds per barrel.
It was that. Don't quote me on that, but that has happened in the past. That's not.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean that's conservative on some level.
Yeah. So when I say correct for flavor, sometimes we'll move the beer into its final packaging tank, taste it there pre-carb, and realize like, oh gosh, like this doesn't have like the explosive character that it needs, and then we'll call up our best friend up at Luther, and he'll emergency roast something, and then
Sure.
So I would say if you're in a pinch, like we have been in the past, you can eke out what flavor you want in as little as a day or two.
Yeah.
If there's already like a base level of flavor. So the only analogy that I've ever used in the past is sort of like you're making a stock first to then use that stock to make a soup. So like you get a base level of flavor.
Right.
To work with, and then you cap it off in the end, or like it's the frosting to the cake. You know what I mean?
Your brewery's CFO is a saint, and being able to operate that way and say, yeah, this batch is going to take a few hundred extra more pounds of nuts. I mean, it's an insanely challenging approach to take from a financial perspective.
His name's Scott, and he believes in this.
Okay, hey. You've got the support and you've got the backing.
Thanks, Scott.
Not every brewery has that same kind of luxury, but that's
it's one of those things that also, because we're a small town, we've had to make beers this way to gain attraction, to get people to come to us.
Sure.
Because we don't distro, so we have to go over the top in order to be heard. So
yeah. And again, some strong competition in this tiny little market. It's got to be good. It's got to be good. So we've talked about nuts. Are there other adjuncts that you all are particularly attracted to that and have found a process that works for you? I mean, I'm curious about this. It just seems like you're pulsing, but you're also extracting cold
surface area. Yeah.
You're creating more surface area, but then you're also working against that by doing a cold extraction. You're also doing it in bags where, material can clump up and it becomes harder to kind of mix and get the most out of all of that surface area. There's some ups and downs to the way this is going. I'm curious. I mean, obviously, this is why you're using a whole bunch of.
So yeah, actually, Teff could speak on this. The very first batch of BA coconut beer we made, we actually threw it all in, freeballed it in the tank, and I was kind of like right now out of town, and Teff had to deal with it. And you want to tell him about it, Teff?
Yeah. So the 2017 release of BA Sticker Shock. One of our first BA beers, the first time we had done coconut on the commercial scale, and thought like, we'll just throw some filters in line. It'll be easy to transfer this beer on and off coconut. It was like a 17-hour transfer for 100 gallons of beer.
Oh my God.
But the unfortunate,
It's got plugged. The valve.
Yeah, it was just that coconut just got stuck in the valve. The unfortunate thing about it was that we were going to do the two infusions,
So
that Bob was talking about earlier. And so the second tank was already ready with the coconut in it as I'm doing the 17-hour transfer.
knowing it's going to happen again.
Yeah.
So
just transferring it onto more loose coconut. We got it off. We got that beer packaged. It tasted very nice.
So yeah, after that experience, we're like, well, that's never happening again. And so we started bagging everything, and that's when we started developing the tank geometry thing that we use now for max surface area based on your volume. Truth be told, it's kind of, we actually leave these transfers hooked up overnight. So if you think about pulling like a tea bag, like bagged up tea bag out of your tea, like how much liquid leaches out of it after you pulled it out. So we'll actually leave the transfer hooked up overnight after the transfer, and the amount of beer that leaches out of these bags is pretty substantial. And so that's, I guess, one additional thing that we've learned over time that, mostly from like not having to clean it out of the tank, after it's all done. But we're like, hey man, we're like losing like 5 gallons to these bags.
So you let them sit for a little bit and you try to reclaim that then.
Yeah. And it actually works pretty well. So the bags are actually quite dry at the end of it. And that's the only thing that we've really learned over time. Makes cleanup easier. And then we gain a little bit more volume in these micro amounts of beer that we already make.
Yeah. Beyond coconut and nut ingredients per se, are there any other adjuncts that you all particularly like working with, or have found some creative methods to use in your barrel aged stouts, or barrel aged and regular imperial stouts?
So we both love coffee, as a lot of people do. So we actually use coffee from our local roaster and our friends at Impact Coffee in Decorah. Typically, we prefer an African coffee.
Why?
It's just honestly, the character that you get. Like I think Ethiopian coffees, like we Teff and I both love Ethiopian coffees. So either Ethiopian or Tanzanian. Cinnamon is touch and go. I like it, but it seems to be, you need a deft touch with it. So in the past, we would also make kind of the quote Mexican style like stout. So I always loved this stuff. Was coming out of St. Louis, like the original.
Sure.
The OG Abraxas, like that stuff, so good. And so we actually made a couple chili cinnamon beers, but we've kind of skewed away from that now, leaning more into our nut game because that's what we personally like to make, and then people drink. Other than that, like if you want to get into the cans, we'll do pastry things. One of my favorites also involves nuts, but black walnuts, which are kind of indigenous to the area, that have a more intense flavor than like a regular English walnut. And then brownies. Basically, Ryan will make us all these pastries. We can throw them in the beer, but for the BA stouts, we try to keep it a little bit more simple and strictly coconut or nut forward.
Walnut's a tough one, especially with black walnuts with a little bit of that bitter component to it. Where
they're crazy expensive. Yeah.
How do you make a delicious tasting beer out of that?
We've actually only done one, and honestly, the only reason I think it was a brownie black walnut BA imperial stout, and quite frankly, I think the bitterness was counteracted by the sugar in the brownie.
Right.
We haven't done a straight up black walnut beer yet, but someday.
Sure. Well, let's switch gears and talk about pastry sours, because that's another element where you all incorporate interesting ingredients into this broader piece. Talk to me a little bit about that program and the creative process behind it.
It's kind of like with the stouts. Very few people were doing that at the time, and we became known for them. And because we're a taproom only brewery. People would come and buy all the cans, and it was a great feeling. Have people travel all that way. I was actually personally inspired years ago by making the pilgrimage from Decorah all the way to Casey, and I was enamored with their. I mean, obviously their beers are absolutely outrageously amazing, but enamored with their approach to their fruit, that they were able to have these connections with fruit farmers and use only high quality fruits. We weren't able to do that with our our kettle sours, but we have basically strictly used IQF frozen fruit. Since we started. And so
really, so you're not using aseptic puree then?
We do have a couple purees that we finally, what we say, we succumbed to puree pressure or something like that. But that's typically for, we rarely do, and actually now the only time we use puree is for actually a puree seltzer. But no, it's all IQF fruit. And so typically, in the past, it was so much easier back then. All you had to do was just raspberry, just peach, and and now it's like an arms race. You have to what else can you throw into a beer? So I would say typically a common beer would be 7 barrels of beer would be 600 pounds of fruit, and then 20 sheet cakes, 20 sheets of white cake that, once again, the college will make for us.
So actual white sheet cake.
Yeah.
Why do that rather than finding ingredients like, vanilla or adjusting the malt component to add a more biscuity, bready kind of element to it?
We have done that in the past. And it's just one of those things that comes back to the quality of the ingredient. That, I don't know, it's like I would say textural component, but I feel like there's no other way to get around it. So I guess I call the other beers a simulated pastry beers versus adding the actual product to it adds a layer to it that you can't get any other way.
So we've talked about using sheet cake, and that's a crazy process.
So the pastry sour. So originally we first came into it, like I said before, using whole fruit, and that was just enough. And then we started experimenting on a small scale with adding actual pastries to it, and the reception was enormous. People loved it.
Is this something that was sensorially driven, or is this something that is Instagram driven, changing people's perceptions on their palate?
So we had never had one before.
Is this something people can perceive blind?
Oh, actually, I have a fun story about that. So the same people that make other things for us have a granola that they give out to all the students. And the very first iteration making a granola-based beer is peach granola. And blind tasted it randomly at a friend's house, and a woman that happened to go to school there was like, "Is this Luther granola?" She was actually able to pull it out of the beer, which is crazy. So I think we've dialed down the level of pastry-ness over time to be a little bit more balanced. Definitely let the fruit shine, not so much candies and cakes, but they do have an underlying foundation of flavor in the beer. I guess I would say my favorite is the granola or a white sheet cake or muffins. We've done donuts in the past. Those
sure.
People don't love that so much. I actually had a friend say, "Bob, I love you and your generosity, but please never give me one of those again."
Fair enough. So I assume on this that you're using a pretty standard lactic acid bacteria, kind of kettle sour process.
Yep.
And that's okay. If there's nothing unique or special to that, then
nope. Omega's lacto blend, and we ferment it out with Quake yeast.
Oh, okay.
Because we are a Norwegian themed brewery, we actually use Quake yeast in all of our IPAs and in our kettle sours.
Also, the flavor of the fermentation is not really the point in these beers, and getting it done quickly. And
like I said before, it's the canvas in order to paint on.
For sure.
Yeah, much like the imperial stouts, it's a standard base recipe, and you just kind of go from there.
Yeah. Talk to me about using IQF fruit, individually quick frozen fruit, versus some, obviously, puree, aseptic puree has, been pasteurized and isn't going to necessarily bring in anything else that, could cause issues with that. IQF fruit, may still have living yeast. It may, there's a whole bunch of other elements that now come along with process, for you all as a brewery trying to use this. First of all, whether you're pulsing the fruit yourself then in order to kind of maximize extraction, then making sure that, again, there's not yeast in there that's going to continue to do something, ferment all of that sugar out from the fruit and then cause stuff to blow up, or, even if it's not going to cause a problem, to at least not dry out so that the beer then isn't what people expect when they drink it. Talk to me a little bit about your process with IQF fruit.
So we will receive a pallet about 2 days in advance to using. That's essentially the perfect amount of time to let it naturally thaw, so that it's still cold, but mostly thawed all the way through. And we'll load it into the tank along with all the other pastries, transfer the beer onto it. Typically the beer is actually warm and not cold, because the fruit is still like partially frozen, not fully frozen. And at that point we're able to just turn on the glycol, chill it back down, and once again, like another cold extraction, typically for about 2 weeks. We actually like that, but a single infusion for 2 weeks. And in terms,
it's a lot of contact time for fruit.
I don't know. We feel that's, it works for us. If you try to shorten it, you really don't get the extraction. I mean, longer would actually be better. I mean, if you think about like some of the sour beers that are on, cherries for half a year or something like that. We wish we could do that, but we can't with our tank space. But yeah, it's another cold extraction. I wish we could afford a pasteurizer. We currently don't have one. And we have had problems in the past, but for the most part, knock on stainless, we actually have somewhat stable beers as long as they're kept cold. I know this is a controversial trend in the industry.
Sure.
But I don't know, it's one of those things that it's because everybody's buying from the exact same company that like we have like a different product that can make us stand out. I mean, like the quality of the strawberry I think is fantastic, and the company that we're buying it from, quality of all the fruit is amazing. We saw that everybody was most breweries were going down the path of puree and either doing like the slushy version. We typically don't do that. They're actually quite clear beers, so they sit on the fruit for a while, and then we actually have a double filter set up that when we transfer it out, I mean, there will be, obviously fruit clogging issues, kind of like Justin was talking about coconut earlier. But this method, we're able to break off one of the filters, clean it out, sani it, and purge it out again to keep the flow going. That being said, some transfers can take a very long time. Some can be 35 minutes, or they could be 6 hours. It depends on the day. Yeah, it's one of those things. It's this harking back to the same thing with the stouts. It's this cold extraction for a long period of time, and we've landed on that, and it works for us.
Sure. Well, we've talked a lot about using adjunct ingredients over the course of this episode. Let's pull back a little bit and talk about the bigger picture for Pulpit Rock. You all also brew hoppy beers, you brew lagers, you brew across the spectrum of beers that you want to drink, beers that your fans want from you. And, you're exploring these things in a rich way so that people, when they come to Pulpit Rock, have a variety of different styles of beer to explore and taste through. But what's the big picture goal for Pulpit Rock? What do you all hope to achieve in the next few years? And what's the ultimate vision for Pulpit Rock as a brewing business?
So I'd say continue to be a community-focused business where people can come and enjoy themselves, have a tap list that appeases all palates. So we're known for these pastry beers, but the majority of our consumers will drink like our lager or our IPA daily. I guess one of my personal goals is that we utilize more local ingredients. We actually have connections with a couple local farmers, and actually Iowa's first maltster to be able to use more local ingredients to make, I I guess more non-adjuncted, simple beers, simple ales and lagers. I mean, I personally wish cask ales would come back. I really love them. But just very approachable beers and just continue to be a community-focused company.
Having something for everybody that they can come in, they can order something and enjoy it. Everything from a nice lager, IPA to the pastry beers. Something for everyone.
Yeah, I would say a couple of years back, our tap list got a little skew with being pastry, and I guess we're coming back into a sense of balance. So that's our goal for the future, a balanced tap list with better balanced beers, all using the highest quality ingredients we can afford.
Seeking more balance despite this broad imbalance in varying ways.
It's what we're known for.
Balancing your imbalance,
yes.
If you will. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap this up. For nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. The Alchemator from ProBrew strips the alcohol from beer without sacrificing flavor and color. Reclaim your margins with Old Orchard's craft concentrate blends. Try Dry Bacteria from Fermentus for your next sour beer. Contact Country Malt Group today to try the new roasted malts from Best Malls. And Arrived provides the necessary tools to help your brewery grow. Of course, your magazine subscription directly supports our ability to bring you this podcast. Each week, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on that subscribe button. Let us know that this content matters for you. And of course, if you're a subscriber, you can go dig in those archives and check out Recipe for Little Buddy from Pulpit Rock, as well as the Breakout Brewer story that we did a few years ago. Bob and Justin, if people want to learn more about Pulpit Rock, where do they find you all?
Well, you can follow our company Instagram at PR Brewing. Otherwise, we have our sister account, the Pulpit Rock Insider, obviously Facebook, and our website. Or come meet us at the brewery and we'll hang out with you.
In Decorah, Iowa.
Decorah.
In beautiful Decorah, Iowa.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for joining me on the podcast. Cheers.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.